Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients or your income or your friends or the cute memes you'd love to look at on the internet. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby, and on this show, I share stories, strategies, and experiments for creating community, sharing your work, and making some money without social media. We are currently between seasons of the show. We wrapped up season 4 in mid-November and will be returning for season 5 in January. But this week, I am sharing a few best of episodes of the podcast. These are fan favorite episodes. They are my favorite episodes, and I am resharing them to invite some new friends into our listenership. So this week I had the pleasure of being on the world-renowned podcast, We Can Do Hard Things. And we had such an amazing conversation about Glennon's decision to step back from social media, specifically her Instagram account, where she has over 2 million followers. And I was able to be in conversation with her about why she made that decision, the things that have been coming up since then, and what the future might look like for her on Instagram and other social media platforms. It was an amazing conversation. I hope that you have listened to it. And if you are now tuning in to Off the Grid because you listened to it, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm sharing these best of episodes this week, especially for you. Over the past 2 days, I shared my story of leaving Instagram, as well as a follow-up on the 5 stages of leaving I encountered in the 2 years after I was off the apps. And today I'm sharing a more recent episode on how to feel seen off of social media. Because in the many, many conversations that I have had for this podcast, what comes up time and time again are the deepest fears and desires that we each hold around being seen and affirmed and validated in our lives. And how many of us have turned to social media for that over the past decade and feel really stuck there because we're not totally sure where else to feel seen in those ways. So in this episode, I dive into what it means to feel seen, how social media provides that for us in a way that is honestly, I think, no longer nourishing or fulfilling any of our deeper needs, and ways that we can get those needs met away from social media platforms. This is one of the most listened to episodes of the show, so I'm really excited to bring it back to the top of the feed for you today. And whether you are hearing it for the first time or listening to it again, I hope that it offers you just a deep sense of possibility that you can step back from social media if you want to, or if you've already done that, that you can make other big changes in your life and still find community and affirmation and the love on the other side of those decisions. So this will be the final best of episode that I'm sharing this week before the feed goes quiet until the new year. I'm so grateful that you're lending this episode your attention, and I hope that after you listen, you'll dive into our back catalog where there are many, many more Off the Grid episodes waiting for you. As always, if you want to put any of this into practice, I also recommend going and downloading our free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. Find the link to get that for free in the show notes. And for now, let's dive into this best of episode on how to feel seen off social media. In our exploration of how to feel seen off social media, let's start with a more basic question. What does it mean to feel seen? Well, as the good millennial I am, when I thought about this question, the first thing I did was Google it and read Google's AI overview of the definition of feeling seen. So what Google tells me is that feeling seen is a state of being recognized through validation, support, inclusion, or representation of one's identity, needs, emotions, and/or physical presence. It can also be described as a feeling of deep connection or being present that can lead to trust. Feeling seen is similar to feeling heard, but feeling seen is more about identity, while feeling heard prioritizes a message. Some ways to make people feel seen include practicing active listening, being fully present, reflecting on what you hear, validating feelings, showing empathy, telling someone how much you value them, and telling someone you love them for everything that they are, which is like super sweet from a robot, right? Or honestly, from whatever human the robot stole that from. But I really appreciate this definition as a starting point for our conversation around feeling seen, because it brings in a lot of key words that I'm going to kind of unpack today. According to that definition, feeling seen is about being recognized, validated, supported, represented. We feel seen in our identity, our needs, our emotions, or our physical presence. Feeling seen is about feeling connected. It's about trust. We can already hear in this definition that there is a lot wrapped up in feeling seen. And so I think that the first step for any of us who are asking ourselves how to feel seen, do we feel seen on social media or off of it, is to reflect on this question. What does it mean to feel seen? What is most important for me in feeling seen? What is at stake for me in feeling seen? And if those questions feel really resonant, I would invite you to pause this episode right here and take a moment to reflect on them. Pull out your notes app, pull out a journal. What does feeling seen mean to you? And then what does feeling seen on social media mean to you? And what does feeling seen off social media mean to you? These are really personal questions, and I invite you to spend a little bit of time thinking about your own answers before we unpack mine. So now that we've gotten what does it mean to feel seen on the table, or we've at least started to talk about this definition, which is frankly like really broad, let's get a little more specific. What does it mean to feel seen on social media? Because we're not talking about feeling seen writ large. We're talking about what it means to feel seen on social media. So let's go to social media next. I think that feeling seen on social media happens in a lot of different ways, like through some different technologies of the platforms. So we can feel seen by making a post. We can feel seen by likes or comments on a post. We can feel seen by replies to our stories. We can feel seen by a DM from someone. We can also feel seen by another person's post. We can feel seen by a comment on their post that like has the same take that we do on the post itself. We can feel seen by a meme. We can feel seen by a sound. We can feel seen by a trend. There are so many ways that we feel seen on social media. And I think when it comes down to it, what we mean there is that we feel recognized. We feel like something in that post, comment, engagement, reply, meme, or trend is reflecting us back to ourselves. We're finding a little bit of ourselves out there on the social media platform, and that makes us feel seen. And sometimes we find ourselves in someone else's expression through their post, through a comment elsewhere. And sometimes we find ourselves in the validation in something that we have shared. So going back to that original definition, validation and representation can be two pretty different forms of feeling seen. We can feel seen when someone else represents something we recognize about ourselves, and we can feel seen when someone validates something we've shared about ourselves. And I think in that way, feeling seen becomes kind of a loop. It's like a reciprocal circulation of I find myself out in the world, I come back to myself and feel validated in who I am. Or I share myself out in the world, that gets validated and makes me feel seen. And I think that's what produces a lot of the feel good feelings that we get from social media, or at least many of us have gotten at some point on social media. Now, speaking of those feel-good feelings, I think that a lot of us may not reflect on how we feel seen on social media until we don't feel seen there. Like we may not reflect as much on our visibility until we feel invisible. I imagine all of us can feel the acute pain of posting something and no one liking it and feeling really not seen. And even if you're not posting on social media, even if you're just using the platform, I think often we don't feel seen there when we're scrolling and we're scrolling and we're scrolling and everything we're seeing is just so different and quote unquote better than our own life. And this is something that I just hear more and more and more from other people. Everyone's talking about the pervasiveness of social comparison on social media apps and how bad it feels. And I'm sure this resonates in many of our personal experiences. And there's also research that has been done to investigate this phenomenon of social comparison on social media. So a 2020 research review published in Current Opinion in Psychology talks about how social networking sites provide a fertile ground for social comparison to take place because of the unprecedented scale of people to compare ourselves to. Additionally, because of the aspirational character of these apps, we're more often confronted with the successes of other people, their quote unquote highlight reel, than their failures. And so we're often stuck in what these researchers call upward social comparison, where we're comparing ourselves to people that we perceive to be better, further along, more successful than us, rather than looking at people who are perhaps a few steps behind on a similar journey. So because of the prevalence of this upward social comparison, these researchers argue that there is a negative impact to our social well-being. And in this particular review, they even go as far as to say that these negative feelings following social comparison on social media sites may, and I'm quoting here, ironically cause people to engage in further damaging social comparisons, creating a vicious downward cycle. I mean, who among us has not doom scrolled their way through a whole downward spiral cycle of compare and despair? I mean, I've certainly done that. I'm sure you can relate if you're listening to this. And stepping away from that research review, I think that one of the reasons this is so common is because social media quantifies what it means to be seen. Social media gives us specific metrics, the like, the comment, the follower count. And these metrics publicly declare, I am seen. If you have enough followers, you're seen by enough people. You not only are saying that, it is out there in public. Everyone can see it. Everyone can see how many likes your post got. Everyone can see how many comments are there. Everyone can see how many followers you have. On social media, we're all out there declaring that we are seen, or we're confronting these moments where we are not seen, and that's happening in public, right? You share the great post and it gets 3 likes and everyone can see that it got 3 likes, or you turn the like count off so they can't see it, but they can see that your profile only has 100 followers or 500 followers or 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers. You know, we have all these numbers out there in public declaring I am seen or I am not seen. And I think when we declare that enough, when we engage in this dynamic enough, what it means to feel seen gets disconnected from the actual feeling of support, presence, and trust that we started with. The metrics start to matter more than the connection. And as a result, feeling seen, aka connection, gets replaced by being seen, aka visibility. And now we go to these apps to feel seen, to find connection. But what we're met with is the impulse to be seen, to get more visibility. And that is a really murky, challenging, problematic conflation. To go even one layer deeper, I think this is especially challenging for business owners, because business owners have another part of this equation. We have also been taught that more visibility equals more money. So we've got social media platforms training us to equate feeling seen with being seen. And business gurus telling us to equate being seen with making money. And then through some fucked up transitive property, we end up with this idea that feeling seen equals making money. And that, I think, is a recipe for feeling unworthy, undervalued, and frankly, just kind of lost in what we're doing with our work and sharing our work online and our lives more broadly. So just to recap, before we take a very quick break. So far, we've talked about what it means to feel seen, what it means to feel seen on social media, and the recognition loop that we get there that can feel really good, sharing our work to get validated, finding other people who represent parts of our identity, feeling good in that process. And we also talked about what's happening when we don't feel seen on social media, why these platforms are rampant with social comparison, and how the quantifiable nature of that social comparison leads us to conflate feeling seen with being seen, and how we end up replacing connection with visibility, and perhaps even equating feeling seen with making money in the process if we're business owners. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about how to feel seen off social media. Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid, hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. So in the final part of this episode, I want to talk about what I promised you in the title, how to feel seen off social media. And based on everything I've just said, I think there are two parts to this, or at least two parts that I want to explore today. The first is more about like our human selves and our need to connect. And the second is more about why it can feel hard to connect on the other side of social media due to this issue with metrics. So let's go to the human side first. I want to acknowledge that many of us go to social media for self-expression and connection with other people that we don't have access to in our daily lives. This is where Becca and I started our conversation. If you listened to that episode, she shared about how there were parts of herself that she felt didn't get seen in her daily life, but that were witnessed and validated and recognized on social media. And that's why she wanted to spend more time there, which makes perfect sense to me. Many of us live lives where it may not feel good or even be safe to express ourselves in the fullest sense in our immediate environment. You know, I think a lot about my queer community here. It may not be safe to perform your gender in your local community. It may be very hard to connect with other folks who eat, breathe, live, dress, and dream like you do, especially for those of us who don't live in urban centers that are full of, many different kinds of people. If you go to social media to feel seen as your true self in ways that are truly not accessible to you in your local community, I support and celebrate you. But I also think social media will always be rampant with social comparison. So often when we go to that space for validation, we may be met with a lack of recognition or misrecognition that feels just as alienating as not feeling seen in our lives offline. So I don't think social media is necessarily the answer here. I understand the appeal of going there, and I want to validate the folks for whom it feels really good to be there. But I also think in that space, you will always confront these challenging dynamics of social comparison and the direct metrics that quantify our visibility and as a result, our value to that space. And I think that that is a challenging foundation to build relationships and frankly, like self-worth on. I think that's really hard to do. But again, I think that many of us do seek and need to find connection online. And so for those of us wanting to feel seen off social media in different aspects of our identity, I would recommend that we find virtual spaces that are just less hierarchically and metrically oriented than social media. We can join Discords, we can join paid communities, we can reach out to people for one-on-one connection. I think that we can step into spaces that invite us to connect more socially than parasocially. I think that rather than following a bunch of influencers who we admire and we get mired in these parasocial relationships with, we can join online communities where we're invited into non-hierarchical relationship and we can get to know people in that way. And in my experience, I tend to feel much more seen by my peers than by people I may be aspirationally paying attention to. I feel more seen in my relationships than I do in my parasocial relationships. And so I think that if you're listening to this episode asking, how do I feel seen off social media when it's this place that I go to get seen in these very specific ways, I would just invite you to expand your sense of where you might go to feel seen in those ways. This is where you go back to that journaling. This is where you reflect on that question of like, how do I feel seen on social media? And then you find alternatives to those ways that you feel seen. Maybe a slightly different version of that question is, what parts of myself feel most seen on social media or only feel seen on social media? And can I find ways for those to feel seen in other spaces? Even if you stay on social media, I think it can be valuable to find other ways to validate and support those aspects of our identity in addition to social media. Because again, I just think that we've learned that social media is not a safe or stable foundation to build on. Because your profile could get blocked and deleted and all of a sudden it's all gone, right? And if you have no connections on other platforms or in your daily life, that can be really, really disorienting, not just socially, but also for your identity if you're relying on social media to feel seen in certain ways. So I want to encourage and support you in bolstering those identities in additional spaces or alternative spaces if you are off social media altogether. So this takes me to the second part of feeling seen without social media, which is that I think we have to reconnect with what it means to feel seen, and we have to define that for ourselves away from the metrics that social media has attached us to. Because even if we step away from social media, these platforms have already trained us to become really attached to metrics as the signs of feeling seen. And when that's happened, it's really hard to feel seen without the numbers. And that's why many of us, myself included, I think get really wrapped up in metrics on other platforms when we leave social media. Right. So I check my podcast downloads like probably more than is healthy for my mental health. Similarly with email subscribers or with revenue, right? There are all these metrics, especially inside of a business, that we could turn to seek out that quantifiable number of feeling seen. Again, maybe it's not follower count now, but it could be podcast downloads, email subscribers, revenue, open rate, click rate, purchase rate, like all of that could become your metric that replaces that sense of like, oh, I feel seen now. And I think that is something that social media has done to us. We have lost touch with the feelings that were the guideposts of feeling seen because we outsource those feelings to metrics. And now we have to redefine what it means to feel seen for ourselves. And I think that means disconnecting connection from visibility again. I think it means distinguishing relationship building from audience building. That equation I talked about earlier, where through social media, feeling seen gets equated with being seen, we got to make those things not equal each other anymore. Because I think at the heart of feeling seen is everything that we started with: recognition, validation, support, inclusion, representation. But I think even more so, I think those are all kind of different proxies for feeling seen. What it's actually about is deep connection, presence, and trust. And those are the guideposts to feeling seen. I know I feel seen when I feel deeply connected, present, and trusting, and trusted. I feel seen in relationship. And I think that's what I'm seeking when I want to feel seen. The number can't actually see me, right? When I really reflect on it, even with this podcast, an episode that has gotten more downloads will not feel better than an episode that got more responses from people. It's that relational quality that makes me feel seen. Now, the more downloads may make me feel successful. So I think that, again, we have to add more nuance here. Like, what does it mean to us to really feel seen? And I actually think we need to disconnect feeling seen from feeling successful in our business. That's what I talked about in my last episode, Success is a Cycle. I talked about redefining success on our own terms. And I also think we need to redefine feeling seen on our own terms. And I think this is a challenge to us as business owners: releasing the metrics and distinguishing feeling seen, being seen, and making money again. And we can still do all three. We can feel seen, we can be seen, and we can make money. We just need to figure out when, where, and how we're doing each one, rather than mixing it all up in the mess of posting about ourselves and our business on social media. Because if I'm getting to the heart of what feels really bad about all of this, about going to social media to feel seen, especially as online business owners, I think it's because we're taking our innermost stories, we're packaging them up with a photo on an app, and we're trying to say look at me, validate me, and pay me all at the same time. And I think that feels pretty icky to those of us who really value genuine connection and care and being in community with other people. Maybe it doesn't for you. That's okay. But for me, that doesn't feel good when I wrap all that up together. And I want to think about business and relationships in different ways than that, which is why I left social media. And again, you don't have to do that. But I think that takes me to where I want to close this episode. Because I think the final part of feeling seen off social media, the final part of how to feel seen off social media, is embracing this tension. The tension between being a human, sharing your work with the world, that wants to be seen and doesn't want to be seen, that wants to be out there and witnessed, and also that wants to be behind the scenes creating your thing and not having to market it. And as I prepared this episode, I saved 2 quotes from D.W. Winnicott that I wanted to share with all of you, especially for all my artists out there. And he writes, "Artists are people driven by the tension between the desire to communicate and the desire to hide. It is a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found." And I think all of us face this in our businesses to some extent, at least those of us who are creative business owners, whose businesses are grounded in our creative process. We want to be seen and we're afraid of being seen. We want to connect and we're afraid of connection. We want to hide and we really, really need to be found, right? This is the marketing conundrum that so many people come to me with, right? You're like, I just want to make my work and make money and not have to do the sharing it part. But that's a piece of it. And I actually think it can be really generative when that tension is what holds the whole ecosystem together. When we recognize that we want to be out there in the world and we also want to be in our hermit cave doing our thing. And how can we embrace that as a generative tension instead of feeling torn between the two, torn apart between the two sides of it? So if I was going to wrap today's episode up in a few key takeaways, if I was going to answer this question of how do I feel seen off social media, I think that the first step is reflecting on how do you want to feel seen and what are the ways that you feel seen on social media. I think that we have to start there. And then from there, I think we go into connection. How can you create deeper connection around those ways that you want to feel seen off of social media? How can you find spaces or people to feel seen with away from these apps? And then how can you embrace feelings of feeling seen that are not connected to metrics? So those 3 steps are all going to help you redefine what it means to feel seen and to re-embed yourself in relationship in your community. And if I had a takeaway from the first 3 seasons of Off the Grid, it would be all about relationships. I think at its core, this podcast is about being in business in relationship with others. Or it's about building our businesses on the foundation of reciprocal relationships and trusting that web to take care of us because we take care of it. And I think that's where I'll leave you, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that if you enjoy this show, you will join the Clubhouse. Come get some fun episodes, some community combos, some curated link emails. And, just support the show. The Clubhouse is also super affordable, $5 a month or $50 a year. If you've got some money right now, I'd love your support by joining the Clubhouse. If you don't, I'd really appreciate your support with a 5-star rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And as thanks, I offer you the toolkit. I offer you all 75 episodes of this show that exist so far. And I promise to come back for season 4. So I hope we get to connect in the Clubhouse or on the interweb while I'm away from this public feed. And until next time, my friends, I will see you off the grid and on the interweb. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really